Welcome to the Radiant Visalia podcast. Join us at one of our two services, 9 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. Download the Church Center app or visit our website, radiantvisalia.com, to stay connected with us. All right, enjoy.
There is a heavenly city that I'm compelled to find.
If you've got a Bible, you can open it to Mark chapter 2. We've done it. We've come to the end of our series on holy habits. We've come to the end of our series on spiritual disciplines. This is it for us. We're signing off. You don't have to practice silence and solitude anymore. It's done. You did it. You look more like Jesus. I can tell from the stage. Would you take just a moment, and if you've been a part of this journey with us, would you just share with the person next to you which spiritual discipline you think has kind of made the biggest impact on you? Come on, I'm not the only one who has to do the talking around here. If it's silence and solitude, just look at him and nod. Not talking. So these holy habits hopefully have been more than just disciplines, although discipline is certainly a part of becoming a disciple of Jesus. But it's more than just discipline, right? We're praying and have been contending that these disciplines or these habits should facilitate change and transformation in our lives. And they should provide for us a place to be with Jesus, be like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. These are practices and habits based on the lifestyle of Jesus. Because we were, as a church, tired of having the pressure of acting like Jesus in moments without embracing his overall lifestyle that enabled him to radically forgive and love enemies and give his life away and serve and spend time with the Father, right? There was a lifestyle that he embraced that enabled him to do the Jesus stuff in the moments. Often we feel the pressure to be like Jesus in the moment without embracing the habits that enabled him to do what he did. So last week, it was the first week on Sabbath. We're talking about the discipline, the holy habit, the practice of Sabbath keeping. And we spoke last week on what is Sabbath and why we Sabbath. And we spoke primarily from the Old Testament. We went back to the creation story and said why we Sabbath is that rest is woven in to the very fabric of creation. And then we went to the 10 Commandments, because keeping the Sabbath day holy is the fourth commandment. And so we read large chunks of scripture from large books on the side of the Bible that you maybe don't spend most of your time in. We sat in kind of what is the Mosaic law, the commands that God gave to Moses. And we also talked about the creation story, that essentially we're image bearers. We were made in the image of God, and God worked, so we work, and God rested, so we rest, right? The word Sabbath comes from a Hebrew word that means to cease or to stop working. It refers to doing nothing related to work for a 24-hour period each week. Every week. This is kind of tough for us, right? Because you can leave the office without leaving work, right? And so this is about stopping, about ceasing, about doing nothing related to work for a 24-hour period each and every week. This week we're going to come to the New Testament with the question, what was Jesus' relationship with Sabbath? If the whole idea of the holy habits is we be with Jesus, be like Jesus, do what Jesus did, then what was Jesus' relationship with Sabbath? Did he keep the Sabbath? How did he keep the Sabbath? Does his coming change the way we observe the day and how we keep it holy? These are the questions that I had this week. There is so much discussion on this. I was unaware of it until the last probably 3 or 4 weeks when I started to dive into this. There are those who believe, these are Christians, Bible-believing, Jesus-loving people, that there still remains a Saturday Sabbath. That Saturday is the day of rest and worship. Then there's a camp that believes that Sunday has now become our Sabbath, our day of worship and rest. Because of Jesus' resurrection, Sunday has become the day. Sunday is the day of rest and worship for the person who believes in and follows Jesus. And then there's another camp which has which could be called the Lord's Day. Let me explain it before you just say I picked that one based on the name. I'm in the Lord's Day camp. Maybe you've heard of it. The idea is that every day is a day of worship, and every day is holy, and every day is a day of rest because what Jesus has accomplished on our behalf. So no one day is holy, every day is a Sabbath day because of the rest and the worship that's possible because of Jesus Christ. Paul would write to the churches in the first century about Sabbath keeping, and he would have this to say to a group. These are Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians who were learning to get along. They were learning to get on together as this new community that Jesus is forming. And he says to this church in Romans 14:5, which I think still applies to us today, one person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. He would write elsewhere to an early church in Colossians 2:16, therefore don't let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. What happens to that shadow now that we have Christ? What happens to the 10 Commandments? What happens to the 4th commandment specifically because of Christ's coming? I believe that the 10 Commandments are still binding for us today. How we observe those and how Jesus has transformed those has and makes a difference. So here's just from the outset where I landed in my very limited understanding. I was super nervous last week because I know there are people there out of a Seventh-day Adventist background who just frankly know more than I do. Also, we've got some brothers and sisters who are Messianic Jews, and they know a lot more about Sabbath than I do. So I was nervous as I preached, and I don't want to come off as the expert on what this means. I'm a novice. I'm learning. But here's where I've landed in limited understanding, is that I don't think it matters so much how we observe the Sabbath or even when we observe the Sabbath as much as it is that we Sabbath. The how, The when, a lot of different ideas. That we should is a command. It's not a suggestion. It's a command. And I think that we do it is most important. Not where, not how, but that we have a time set aside for rest and worship is where I've landed. That we be deliberate, that we be intentional about rest and about worship because it's commanded. Well, I'm not tired. Well, I don't care, right? Go to bed. This is what we do at 8 p.m. We go to bed. This may help you guys understand my stance. I know that I'm to love my wife all the time. And I do love my wife all the time, right? But then there is that date night, which is a special time to get in an argument, right? This is time set aside with like space to fight properly, right? And hopefully make up, right? I know that I'm supposed to love her every day, all the time. But then there's nothing wrong with setting aside that day to have a date night. All your money is God. What? All your money is God's. No. Just the bit I put in the bucket. No. Everything you have is His. If you're His, what you have is His. All of it. And then there's still that practice of taking 10% and dropping it. And we do it, right? Every day is the Lord's day. Every day is a day of worship. Every day is a day of rest because of what Jesus has done. And there's nothing wrong with taking a day and making it a special day, of designating it, of being intentional about it, and practicing Sabbath. Mark 2 and 3. How did Jesus do it? How did He do Sabbath? How do we be with Him, be like Him, do what He did? Could I have some water? Thanks, Mark. Mark 2, starting in verse 23, you can read essentially this passage appears in 3 of the 4 Gospels, slight variations in each. You can also find it in Luke 6, and then in Matthew 12 is where you can find this. Thanks, Mark. Could you pray for me, Mark? Pray for me. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as His disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to Him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. And then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.'" Another time, chapter 3, verse 1, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there, and some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched closely to see if He would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Yes, you know something's about to get crazy right now. Anytime He perceives the thoughts of other people, it gets crazy. Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. And he just looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. And then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. The first thing that you need to know about Jesus' relationship with the Sabbath is that he never violated the fourth commandment. He never broke the fourth commandment. He kept the Sabbath. He never argues the legitimacy of the Sabbath. That's not what he argues. He also, know this from the start, he didn't hesitate to part with some of the traditions that were built on the Sabbath. He violated the teachings that surround Sabbath keeping, not the Sabbath. So there were those commands, the 10 that we read last week, and then there were commands to help you keep those commands. Those are the things that Jesus violated. It was as if God put up fences and said, this is the best way to live. And then men built fences to protect the fences. And then there were more fences to protect the fences. And if you read the Gospels, you know that Jesus messed with those fences and it got him in a lot of trouble. The hot topic of our day seems to be sexuality. Seems to be gender, right? But the hot topic of Jesus' day seemed to be Sabbath and how to keep it. And any reading of the Gospels, again, it comes up a lot. It was the hot topic of the day, and Jesus wasn't scared to speak to it and speak directly to the issue. It gets brought up loads. And you can see through their attempt to kill him that they didn't love his stance. And there are some stances that we can hold today that, probably a good way to get you killed, right? And so his stance on Sabbath was controversial. The next thing you need to know is that Jesus understood the heart behind the command to Sabbath. In many ways, I would say that Jesus didn't cheapen the Jewish Sabbath. I think Jesus deepened their understanding of Sabbath, right? He took it a step further. Command number 6 is what? Don't murder. And then Jesus, when given the opportunity to teach, says, you've heard it said that the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. It's like Jesus is saying here, let me tell you about the heart behind the command. So it's not just about not doing this external thing, it's about keeping track of this internal thing. Command 7 is you shall not commit adultery. It's one of the commands. And Jesus, when given the opportunity to teach and preach, said, you've heard it said that you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So you're playing games with fences and externals. And I'm telling you that God sees the heart. And what gives birth to those actions are some of these secret thoughts that we hold. So he took it a step further, didn't he? So is it any surprise that he would take the fourth commandment on Sabbath keeping and remind us all about the heart behind what it means to keep the Sabbath? Not just external fences and rules and laws, but what's it look like to have a Sabbath heart? What's it look like to have a Sabbath spirit? Because it's not just external for us. And Jesus reminds people of that consistently through the Gospels. Jesus didn't miss the point of it, and he didn't get legalistic about it, which is really difficult because the command was, don't work. Don't work on the Sabbath. But then the argument became, well, what's work? And then there were hundreds of ideas of what constitutes work. And they were argued about, and then laws were put in place. You can't boil an egg. You can't walk more than these many steps. All these things came into place, right? And I think we run that risk as a church. We're just in an eldership training, and there are qualifications for eldership in Scripture. Elders are to be eager to serve. So I sit down with a group of guys, and I'm like, hey, you're supposed to be eager to serve. And they're like, how eager? And then I say, really, really eager, you know? They're like, what does that mean, right? So we can throw stones at these Pharisees, like, come on, guys. I think they were honestly trying to do it. They were honestly trying, how eager? Well, does that mean I have to serve 3 out of 4 Sundays a month, or 4 out of 4 Sundays a month, or 2 out of 4 Sundays a month? What happens when I've got this going on in career and with my family? Then what, right? And so it just gives birth to endless arguments about what it means to actually keep it holy, right? He didn't miss the point, and he didn't get legalistic about it. Then he said this statement, which is so profound. He says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's as if he's saying to the Pharisees, this was a gift and you're screwing it up. How, in giving you this, have you ruined it? I say that to my kids sometimes. We're supposed to be having fun. We're out to eat. You know how often my dad took me out to eat? Once a quarter for good grades. John Owen, who was a Puritan, and if you know anything about the Puritans, they had some laws too. He said a man can scarcely in 6 days read over all the duties that are proposed to be observed on the 7th day. They made resting from your work a work. And Jesus was like, you guys, you're missing the point. Let me tell you about the heart behind it. I love this part of it, that the religious leaders are upset with Jesus because he's broken the 4th commandment and he hasn't kept the 7th day holy. So they now are entitled to break the 6th commandment and murder him. I mean, think of the hypocrisy. And this is of course what legalism is all about, right? Is hypocrisy. So here they are. That's not lawful. He can't heal on the Sabbath. He's breaking the 4th commandment by doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath. You know what we should do? Break the 6th commandment, plot to murder him. This is what Jesus would go on to describe as the plank in your own eye as you're trying to pick a speck out of someone else's, right? The other thing you need to know about Jesus' relationship with the Sabbath is that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Those lines are powerful. Ultimately, we want to be faithful to Jesus, not faithful to the Sabbath. Ultimately, we want to be faithful to Jesus. He's our guy. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. Now, these things most of the time go together. But it's important to point out that our ultimate allegiance is to Jesus, who then invites us to observe the fourth commandment. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. I think you should focus on who our Sabbath is and not when or where our Sabbath is. I think people get mixed up when they start thinking about where and when our Sabbath is. Focus on who our Sabbath is. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. I'll read this passage from Colossians again. Do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or even a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. He's Lord of the Sabbath. That is wild. He's Lord of your rest. Or let me say it again. Is he Lord of your rest? I did all this for you, God. Now I do this for me. This is mine. Jesus described himself as the Lord of the harvest and the Lord of the Sabbath, the Lord of our work and the Lord of our rest. I would say that those are the two areas that you walk out of here thinking you possess. Your work is, by golly, your work. And your rest, by golly, is your rest. This is me time. I decide what to do with it. That's what makes it so restful. The question is, does it? How's it going for you? Or are you coming back from vacations exhausted still? Should you potentially submit even your rest to his lordship? No, I know what it is. It's binge watching Netflix. I just feel revived. I just feel refreshed. Maybe we should submit to Jesus and go, maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know how to take a real rest. Maybe I need to learn even that, because some of my ideas are off, some of my ideas are wonky. Andy Crouch said this in a book that Sapphire gave me. There is perhaps no single thing that could better help us recover Jesus' lordship in our frantic, power-hungry world than to allow him to be the Lord of our rest as well as our work. Lord of the harvest, right? We know how to do things for him. I do. I experience a high level of connection with Jesus when I'm doing things for him. Do we know how to be with him? Do you know how to be with him when he's not telling you what to do? Me neither. The fourth is that if you read the Gospels, Jesus believed the Sabbath was the ideal day to heal and restore broken people. It's like he picked this day and thought, oh, this is the best day to heal and restore broken people. That's what he thought. In John 7, he says to the same group that are ticked, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? And I just love that line. And I think we are to conclude, reading the Gospels, that Jesus has in mind, through Sabbath, our restoration, our healing, and our wholeness. Why are you ticked at me when I make this man whole on Sabbath? Sabbath observance, keeping the Sabbath, resting, learning to be with him, is about our healing. And our healing is not just about something physical. Our healing is about wholeness. He wants to, through Sabbath, make you whole. So, what am I inviting you to do with your life? Going from here, as we discuss potentially the disciplines or the practices or the habits that you could keep, I'm going to invite you to cease. I'm going to invite you to rest. I'm going to invite you to trust. going to invite you to delight. I'm going to invite you to worship. I'm going to invite you to witness. And then repeat. Do it all again. The first thing you have to do in order to do the Sabbath is to cease. Write that down. And then spend the rest of your life trying to work that out. Okay, stop. Got it. What's next? No. Stop. I know, I got it, Trev. Yeah, I know. Stop. Come back a year from now, and we'll go to the next point. Man. Listen to me. In the religious world, if you can't say no, you're a part of a cult. In the church world, if people just assume obedience and you're just pressured to say yes, and you can't stand up and say no, run. You are in a cult. But the religious world is not the only world to have cults, to assume your obedience and to take away your choice to say yes or no. Right? I would say secular fundamentalism is also a cult. Try saying no. Consumerism, a cult. Our sport, potentially some of our friendships. Listen, if you can't say no, you need to go from whatever it is that you're doing. Well, you don't understand, Travis. I just can't say no. Okay, that's fine. Just know that your career is a cult. Well, it's just that if I do this, they're going to make me pay. How many documentaries have we seen like that? Where people are trapped in a cult. Afraid of the shame and what people will do to them if they were to say no. Say no. What cults might you be mixed up in? Jesus, if you read the Gospels, no one has ever described Jesus as a yes man. He wasn't that. He was a lot of things. He was not a yes man. In fact, he said no pretty often. And what I've noticed in my life is it's just easier to say yes, isn't it? It's easy to let those boundaries disappear than it is to hold those. As Eugene Peterson said, busyness in our lives is just simply laziness. You never address it as such because you look so busy. But it's really lazy and easy to just say yes. It's harder to hold the line with my kids. No, we're not doing that. Everything in me wants to buckle because it's like, if I just said yes, this would be over. Yeah, I'll do it. I'm going to invite you to rest. That's the second thing. Rest without guilt. This is interesting. God rested and invited Adam to rest before sin entered the equation. Rest or a nap was not a result of the fall, but a result of God's good creation. Therefore, we can conclude that both work and rest, which were around prior to the fall, will be around in the new heavens and the new earth. You will still rest. You will still sleep. You will still work. So rest without guilt. God didn't rest because he was tired or worn out from creation. He rested to model something for us, right? Every time I use my kids like in a sermon, I should have to pay them $20. But I lay down next to Penelope to tuck her in to model for her rest. I usually fall asleep before she does. But it's as if the cosmic God of the universe lays down next to us to try to teach us how to rest. He doesn't need to go to bed. You do. Sabbath naps had a special name. I won't even try to pronounce it. Sabbath naps had a special name. It's like extra credit on Sabbath if you took a nap. I'm going to invite you to trust. There's a lot of trusting that goes on, and I would say that's the work of Sabbath for most of us, is to trust. It's believed that those who stopped to practice Sabbath on the Oregon Trail arrived sooner than those who pushed through. Those who were migrating on the Oregon Trail, those who stopped and observed Sabbath, arrived sooner than those that just said, we've got to keep going. Trusting the Lord means resting from business as usual. Will Willimon, if you have that name, you know you're going to be quoted one day. Will Willimon. He says that God keeps the world, therefore we do not have to. God welcomes our labors, but our contributions to the world have their limits. If even God trusted creation enough to be confident that the world would continue while God rested, so should we. God is God, and that's what we say when we rest. God is God. Not my job, not my effort. God alone is God, and I can trust him with my efforts. This happens, we always trust experts with our efforts, right? That felt like a comedy bit. You get a physical trainer to convince you that something's happening that you can't see. Because I know when I start eating right and working out, it's like, where's the six-pack, man? And he's like, well, that takes time. You know, it's like, how much time? I started working out last week. I've been hungry for 7 days, man. How come I'm irritable? I'm mad at my kids. Show me the six-pack, you know? And then the physical trainer is next to you, talking to you about what's happening under the surface that you can't see. God is that physical trainer, having to convince us that despite our efforts and activities, stopping does something under the surface. And that there is something going on when we do cease from our work. Be convinced of it, that he knows best. You right now are the Lord of your Sabbath. I right now am the Lord of my Sabbath. And it's just not going that great. You should turn over the keys. Delight. Trust on your Sabbath, delight. Delighting should be a part of your Sabbath. Isaiah 58 says, call the Sabbath a delight. Don't call it useful. Don't call it mandatory. Call it a delight. What gives life? That's the question, right? Jesus stands up and says, what's more lawful, to give life or to take it away? And I think that's a great question on Sabbath. What gives life? What do I do, Travis? I don't know what to do. What gives life? What takes it away? Do what gives life. And that'll be different for every one of us. One author that Tiffany and I had been reading talked about pleasure stacking. That's what went on. Worship. And by that, I don't mean like sing Bethel songs all day. That's not what I'm talking about. There's more to it than that. Kevin DeYoung writes, we rest so that we might be free to worship God. And we give God worship in part by trusting him enough to rest. Witness. Don't just worship, witness. Sabbath keeping was meant to be a testimony to those surrounding nations. Exodus 31 says, then the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbaths, and they'll be a sign. So Sabbath was not just a day. Sabbath keeping was a sign that we work for the guy who created the weekend. And the nations of the earth were supposed to go, wow, they really trust him. Wow, he really is God because you can see him in their calendar. For some of us, it's like, God is God. He's the most important thing about my life. And you can't spot him in your bank statement, and you can't spot him in your schedule. And the watching world goes, yeah, seen you before. But for the person who actually has him in their bank statement and has him in their schedule, it's supposed to be a testimony. It's supposed to witness to the watching world. Sabbath was a sign. I love this because I think you could get in some great conversations. In the ancient world, it was customary to have 2 meals a day, morning and night. But on the Sabbath, meals played a heightened role. There's no dieting on the Sabbath. It included 3 meals a day, sometimes fish and pudding. And then, to top it all off, sometimes it included a 4th meal. Taco Bell didn't come up with it. Our God did. 4th meal. Can you imagine the conversation you'd get in with your neighbors? 2 meals a day? And they're like, hey, what you doing over the fence, you know? It's like, 4th meal. 4th meal? Yeah, fish pudding. I work for the God who created the weekend, man. We celebrate him. He's to be celebrated. Want to know more about him? Sure. It's a day of consecrated happiness, not of religious gloom. It's never meant to be that. There's some tremendous evangelism, I think, can happen as a result of Sabbath keeping. The big buzzword in evangelism is that you look for the person of peace. So you come into a town and you're looking for connection. You're looking for the person of peace in order to evangelize. The problem with that is that if you aren't first a person of peace, you have nothing to say to the person of peace. So maybe we should just try being people of peace, not just looking for people of peace, right? So the idea is that maybe we shouldn't be neurotic or anxious. Maybe we should be content, and then we could become people of peace. Then I don't even think we'd have to look that hard for people of peace. They'd probably find us. Sabbath offers a unique opportunity to witness in the 21st century to our culture that is both exhausted and discontent. In our world, where Monster and Red Bull and Rockstar sales have increased 5,000% since 1999. In that world, we have some unique evangelistic opportunities. The last thing that you're going to have to do in order to do this is just do it again and again and again and again. And turn your phones off. That's the 8th point. The consistency, we tend to go till we can't go anymore. And Sabbath is something of a preventative maintenance. You know, part of the reason that Tiff and I may get in a fight on a date night is because we've gone without a date night for quite some time. But if you stay on top of it, if you continue in it, things could shift. So I would say that's how we do work. We go till we pass out. And God's invitation is just something a little different, right? It'll take a while to figure this out. Make Sabbath mistakes and then go forward in grace. This won't happen easily or quickly like any of the other disciplines. With prayer, you know there's going to be growth. With every other command, you knew there would be growth. And this is, in fact, a command. It is not a suggestion for us. The two sides you could fall off on that I would encourage us not to is legalizing it. Like, I think you can ruin Sabbath with your rules and miss the gift that it is, and not even fumble in grace. And then the other thing that we can fall off on is spiritualizing it. You know, like basically everything means nothing because you've put it all in the clouds. No, take an actual day. Well, a day to the Lord is like 1,000. No, don't do that. Like it's just like 24 hours in a day. You know? Well, it's a meal, but I live by everything that proceeds from his mouth. No, just eat a good meal, you know? Don't spiritualize it away. Don't get all into the legalistic weeds of it. Remember that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. And the Sabbath was made for us, not us for the Sabbath. It serves us. We don't serve it. We serve Jesus, who gave us a day. What a guy. I'm going to pray. Monica, would you come? Could you lead us on in maybe Lord, I Need You on the piano? Lord, I want to pray against the enemy's schemes to distort and destroy this gift. I want to pray against the enemy's schemes to continue to make us, those that follow the living God, feel like slaves. We're not slaves, we're sons and daughters. And help us live out your sovereignty over all of creation by practicing Sabbath. I pray for my brothers and sisters here that you would guard them against attack as they try to cease, as they try to stop. We just know, Lord, that what's coming is emails and a toilet that's overflowing or whatever it is. Help us to expect it, because the enemy does not want us to be with God. And the enemy does not want us to rest in him or abide in him. So fill us with strength. Fill us with courage as we journey into what it means to rest with you. Help just the arguments about even trying to find a window to do this. We just submit our rest to you. Jesus, you're the Lord of our rest. You're the Lord of our Sabbath. We express, we confess, we repent. We've not done good. We've done things that have not replenished us. And we just say, you know best. We're looking to you. Would you lead us, Jesus? Amen.
Thanks for listening. We want to be a resource for you as you walk with Jesus. So please connect with us at radiantvisalia.com. Until next time.
There is a heavenly city that I'm compelled to find. Oh, I love the flowers and trees and the smell of the grinding sea and all the beautiful things here in life. And I'm a pilgrim here on the side of the grave.